Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the City Council meeting of Monday, August 19, 2019. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we have 3 council members participating telephonically, so there might be a little bit of delay, but roll call, please.
Okay. Albertson? Bueller? Okay. Absent. Hoyer?
Present.
Pauline? Lallam?
Here.
Manti? Here. Rademski?
Here.
Roby?
Here.
Vilhauer?
Here.
Y?
Present.
Thank you.
All right, the first item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda. Have a motion by Roby.
Second.
Second by Albertson. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item 2 is a public comment period. This is the time set aside for anyone to come up and talk about anything they want. Seeing no one, I'll move on to item number 3, which is approval of the agenda. And I would like to move item number 13, which is airport related, up to and after item 6, so that the airport items are clustered together. And with that, I'll look for a motion for approval. Have a motion by Y? Pauline? And a second by Manti. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item number 4 is, I don't have that. Kristen. There's a very special award that the finance officer is supposed to hand me so that I can award it to her. But she has not given me this Distinguished Budget Presentation Award, but I can still announce it, that she has headed the department, and the department gets this award for a distinguished presentation of our budget from the Government Finance Officers Association. It's a very prestigious award. Not very many finance offices receive this award, but we did. So I think that we should acknowledge our finance officer, Kristen Bobzine, with a round of applause. It's really great that we have such a smart, competent finance officer and a great finance department. And this award we get year after year. So it's good work that they do. Very proud of that.
Mayor?
Yes.
Mayor, do we know how many years in a row we've received that award?
Over 30. Wow.
Good job.
Yeah. I didn't know it was that many. Yeah, that's great. Okay, item number 5 is approval of the airport ground lease with GMR Aviation, LLC. A motion for approval by Albertson and a second by Holing. And I will ask the airport manager, Todd Syrie, to tell us about this a little bit, and then I'll open the public hearing.
Yes. So this is a 60 by 75 private hangar going up. 25-year term, additional 10-year term. On top of that, the rent is 16 cents a square foot. The annual payment is $864 with a 2% increase every year.
All right. Thank you. And I will open the public hearing. Is there anyone here that would like to speak about this item? Please come forward. See none, I'll close the public hearing and see if the council has any questions or comments. Councilman Roby?
Todd, would you just give a little background of why the terms are so long?
A safety net for the owner of the building. They're going to put a lot of money into this, and it should be a long-term commitment. We don't want to go too long because the FAA also has guidelines on the other side of the coin in case we need to have that area for a taxiway expansion or a runway or such like that. So we try and make them as long as we can without stepping on the FAA's toes.
Do we have the ability to cancel the lease if that would arise, that situation? There's a remedy for that?
Yes, there is a provision in the lease that allows us, if we absolutely need it for some sort of expansion of our airport as a necessity to get out of the lease.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Todd?
Yes.
Todd, this is Glenn. I got a question on this one as well as the next one, because these are both airport board members, or I think this one is an entity related to an airport board member. Are these terms commensurate or comparable to if we were to be leasing to someone not on the airport board?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to get that out in the open and clarify that. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
I would just add that we just approved a lease with Lake Erie Technical Institute, which, now that I'm saying it out loud, also has a member of the airport board. But the terms were identical.
Yep.
What was the last
Okay.
one? Kosuski.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Kozeski, yep.
Yeah, same terms.
Jerry Kozeski had the same terms this year. That lease was also put into effect.
Okay, good to know. All right, any other comments or questions? See none, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item number 6 is approval of the ground lease with Shannon and Cheryl Cruz. Have a motion by Holleen, second by Y, and I will ask Todd to talk about this one. And
Sure.
then I'll open the public hearing.
The terms are exactly the same. I do want to bring up this picture of GMR. This is our very west taxi lane right here, and this actually fills up all the stalls we had allotted for private hangars. Now I will go to the next one. This is the lease is the same format at the 864 as well. 2% increase, and I'll go down to the map and show you where his hangar is going to go. And it's actually on the second, oh, I'm sorry, wrong one. It's on the second taxiway. It's actually over here. So the first taxiway and the second taxiway will be completely full, is what I'm getting at. We'll have 2 spots available on our third taxiway that'll be available. And I'll get into the reason why we don't have 1 spot instead of 2 in our next item.
Okay. Any questions or comments, council? See none, I'll look for action. Oh wait, did I open the public hearing? Nope, I'll open the public hearing. Is anyone here to speak about this? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and now see if the council has any questions, comments. None, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. All right, the next item is actually number 13 in your packet, and that is approval of resolution number 19-38, expressing intent to enter into a 25-year lease agreement renewable for 10 additional years with Yost Aviation LLC for property located at the Watertown Regional Airport. Motion.
Motion.
Have a motion by Manti and a second by Holleen. And this is the FBO, I take it. So, Todd, will you tell us about this?
Correct. This is John and Brenda Yost. Excuse me. And the reason it can't go on our taxiway where John originally anticipated it going is it's too big, which is great. It's a 100 by 104 hangar, So the biggest size we allot is a 75 by 75 to keep our safety areas and object-free areas on the taxiway. So this is 104 by 100, same terms. And this one is actually going to the west of the west lane of hangars. We have some overgrown space back here, and there is a taxiway that leads through here, as you can see on the picture, and it'll tie into this line right here. I apologize, I didn't blow up the page more, but there is a taxiway here. So he'll go back behind the other hangars. And this has been cleared by engineering for drainage and all that stuff for that area.
What about the aprons?
The aprons are responsible by the
The builder?
the tenants, yep.
That tenant puts that into.
Correct.
All right. Okay, so are there any questions by the council?
Todd, I assume the actual lease will come before us then at, the next meeting?
Yes, this is a notice of intent. So in 2 weeks,
Okay.
we'll bring the lease back to you.
Okay, sounds good, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you. Have a good night.
The next item on the agenda is approval of resolution number 19-30, adopting the district boundaries and the plan for tax increment financing district number 8, City of Watertown, South Dakota, and authorization for the mayor to sign the development agreement with the Watertown Development Company and any other documents as necessary. So I have a motion by Holleen and a second by Y. And I would like Chris Shilkins here from the Watertown Development Company, or Tracy Stein from Watertown Development Company, to tell us a little bit about this.
Hi, Tracy with the Watertown Development Company. So TIF District number 8 is going to be for Comprehensive Logistics Incorporated. They are going to be assisting Terex with some of their parts management and warehouse distribution. So they'll be located across the street from Terex, so that will make it more convenient for their processes. So to reduce their costs for putting a location here in Watertown, we did create this TIF district. And we're going to be building a building for them and leasing it back to them.
All right, can we show the map of the district boundary? I think there's, yeah, there it is, in red.
Yep. So the majority of the costs for this TIF are going to go towards the road to be constructed on that lot.
Okay, thank you. Council, do you have any questions? Councilman Albertson?
Tracy, just curious, how many people will that employ, that particular?
Up to 25, and I have the salary ranges in the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman
Tracy, this is Glenn. I don't want to confuse the issue, but can you walk through, I see First Premier Bank is involved as far as providing financing. Can you kind of walk us through how the money is flowing on this project?
Right. The Watertown Development Company is going to be borrowing approximately $1.2 million from Premier Bank to provide for the costs for these projects. And then we will be reimbursed for those costs through the tax increment revenue that will be generated over the 20-year plans for both 8 and 9. So $800,000 will go towards CLI and $400,000 will go towards the Gaikowski project on lot number 3.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Tracy.
Yes.
This is Councilman Hoyer. Just a quick question as well. So with that, when we say that it's being paid back, is it just essentially that the tax revenue is just being redirected directly to paying that loan off? That's kind of how this works in the TIF?
Yeah, the increase in incremental tax revenue over 20 years will be paid back to the Watertown Development Company instead of going towards the city in property taxes. And it's tax increment revenue that you wouldn't see if the project did not happen.
Kristen wants to say something.
Just to clarify, the process is when a TIF is established, that creates its own fund. So as Tracy's speaking to, for each one of these TIF districts, it becomes its own fund where the money is basically accounted for. So as those revenues do come in, then the city will redirect the payment to Watertown Development Company. But each of these will have its own separate fund so we can track how the money flows.
Great, thank you. Councilman Y?
Tracy, is this a new business to Watertown? I have two questions, and I'll let you answer that.
They both are. TIF number 8 is comprehensive logistics, yes, so they are a new business to Watertown. And as far as TIF number 9, they are as well because they have another location in Clark.
And I would imagine you guys are, but is someone keeping track of the impact of this expansion, of what it's bringing in for new buildings, employees, and things of that nature?
Yes, and that's something we do on an annual basis.
And so overall, it's a pretty big impact that we're seeing?
Yes. Yes. Comprehensive logistics is about a $6 million project, and West Side Implement is going to be around $3 million.
Incidentally, probably neither of those businesses would be doing this if Terex hadn't made the investment in Watertown.
That's correct.
So it's snowballs. Other questions, council members?
I guess I just only have a comment. It's Councilman Ware again. But as we go forward with this, I know we kind of talked about it a little bit last time, but, you know, since this is essentially tax dollars being redirected to do these roads, let's just make sure if this is a soggier area, we do our due diligence and build these roads right so that we're not coming back in 5 to 10 years to fix the roads before it really should be fixed. But just tossing that out there, keeping us accountable.
Right, and I don't know if you saw or seen the plan, but we did go with concrete instead of asphalt for this road.
Yeah,
Love it.
good prices.
Yes.
Yeah. That's excellent. It'll be a public road, so. Other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item number 8 is approval of resolution number 19-31, adopting the district boundaries and the plan for tax increment financing district number 9, City of Watertown, South Dakota, and authorization for the mayor to sign the development agreement with West Side Implement Inc. and any other documents as necessary. A
So
motion
moved.
by Holleen, and I think Vilhauer was second.
Give me a second on that.
All right, and Tracy, would you like to expand on this one a little bit?
Yeah, so TIF number 9 is with West Side Implement, and I believe he will be calling this East Side Implement. He's going to be taking over a Kubota dealership in Watertown, so he will be selling Kubota out of that area. He's just expanding, he's not closing his Clark location. So we are assisting him with his project to take care of a lot of the site work that's needed for that lot.
Okay, and this is, again, Watertown Development Company financing?
Yes, this is part of the plan with TIF 8, where we'll be borrowing the money from First Premier Bank to assist with those project costs.
Okay, and the money, the tax increment will,
The incremental revenue over the 20-year span will come back to the development company.
it comes to the city and we pass it straight on?
Yes.
Through to Watertown Development Company?
Correct.
Is that what
Yeah.
that works? All right. Any question, councilmen and women?
This is Glenn. I've got a question in general. I guess I'll direct towards Kristen. I mean, we're getting quite a few of these, and I'm excited about the increased usage. Does this cause finance office much more time, effort as far as tracking activity coming through the tips?
Probably just the initial setup of the funds, and just to make sure that everything is set up from the start. But otherwise, no, when the property tax will actually start coming in, all those different TIFs are identified, so we know where the revenue is. So it's not a lot of extra work on our end.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item number 9 is approval of resolution number 19-34, adopting the district boundaries and tax increment plan for tax increment district number 10, City of Watertown, South Dakota. Authorization for the mayor to sign any related documents as necessary. Authorization for the finance officer to issue a special check in the amount of $1.8 million to the developer, and authorization for the finance officer to issue a second special check in the amount of $225,000 to Watertown Development Company. Have a motion by Holleen and a second by Rademski. And Tracy and Chris, I'll have you please explain these.
Yep, so TIF 10 is going to be a project that we're doing with Jesse Craig from Craig Development out of Fargo. He's going to be demoing, and that is currently in process right now, the Harbor Bar area, the Burritos on Broadway building, and all of our parking lot and a portion of our lot area to develop this 39-unit one-bedroom apartment building with 45 parking spaces for the renters and then 27 public parking spaces outside. The project is expected to create up to 20 jobs because there will be retail space on the bottom floor. And this is about a $6.5 million project. Yeah. So we are under construction right now, and we expect to be complete by the spring.
Oh, the spring.
Spring? 2020.
Oh, okay. Good. Questions? Councilwoman Manti?
Yeah, Kristen, could you just give a quick explanation with folks here about why you're writing special checks, just so they know, how this is working?
Yeah, just to clarify, normal process for the city is bills are submitted by a cutoff time, and then the accounts payable department puts those in. The council gets to see all of those bills before they are actually paid. So if a check or a payment doesn't make it in for the council to approve, I need authorization from the council to issue any check that they have not seen prior. So that's why when you hear I'm asking for authorizations, because I don't have the ability to do that. So.
Good question. Councilman Holleen?
Thank you, Mayor. Question, you mentioned 27 public parking spots?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Where will those be on the map?
They are behind the property.
So kind of where that,
Where
I call it like the nighttime parking lot
Yeah.
behind the bars or something?
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, adjacent to the alley and
Correct.
adjacent to the north-south alley. It's a T alley there. Are there other questions or comments?
Mayor?
Yes.
So I think it might be worth noting that in each case in these TIFs, the planning commission has also been involved in this process as well, and they've given approval to what came before them.
That's a good point. Thank you, Councilman Vilhauer. These have all received the approval of the Plan Commission. Other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 10 is approval of resolution number 19-39 relating to the sales tax revenue bonds, Series 2019, authorizing the issuance and making provisions for their payment. I have a motion by Holleen, second by Rademski, and I would like Kristen to tell us about this.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So the resolution before you, it ties in a little bit with the TIF 7 that we just, or TIF 7, TIF 10, there's so many. TIF 10, yes, I'm right, that we just approved. So during the conversations with us, basically paying $1.8 million, we need to determine if we want to use our reserve cash funds for that or if we want to bond. This is not tied directly to the TIF. It's actually tied just to our capital improvement funds that we have, that we are doing right now, and then even a little bit if there's a carryover into 2020. The reason we're doing that is because the $1.8 million payment will come out of the capital improvement fund, which cuts us a little bit short for our unreserved balance. So the council needs to determine if that's what we want to do, bond for this. It'll be about $2 million bond. Or the other option, if we don't want to bond at this time because there are other projects kind of in the works, the other option that we have is to push back a few projects that are coming before you. You will see the long-term capital plan coming probably end of September. And during that time, we have almost $9.7 million planned to be reserved for capital. So there is some play with how much we set aside for those projects. So that's where I'm open to discussion. I can provide any more information that you want, but this resolution is for $2 million worth of sales tax revenue bonds.
All right, so just for clarification, we could use our reserves, which have been set aside with other projects in mind. Then in the future, when we go to do those projects, we might need to bond at that time instead of right now. Meanwhile, we're saving on financing charges. So we do have reserves that are set aside for projects that we wouldn't have to bond in the future. But if we spend the money today, then we might have to bond in the future, depending on how our revenues go. So is everyone clear on that? So are there any questions? Councilman Rademski?
We said we might have to push back on some of these projects. Does that mean delay the start of these other projects?
Or we might have to bond for them, to do them at their scheduled time, because the money would have been spent today. Because we have the money accumulating in funds for these projects. We set money aside every year so that when the time comes to, we have a long-term plan, and when the time comes, we have the money ready to go. But we do have some projects coming up in the future that probably will require bonding at some point. And if these future projects coincide, bond once for multiple projects rather than bond a little bit now, then bond a little bit later, and so on. So it's just how do we want to use our money? So it's project money. It's set aside for capital improvements, and we could use the money. Yes, Councilman.
So I think our decision is: do you want to bond now, or do you want to wait when something else comes up? It'll be a bigger bond process. We'll spend less on financing, origination fees, whatever, et cetera, all the setup costs of a bond, if we do it in a bigger chunk down the road.
That's correct.
Okay, and to save that money, can you quantify that in some form or fashion?
What did we think about? 6-7%?
8.
About 8% on the whatever the bond is.
$160,000. Okay, so it's pretty meaningful. But the downside is, though, we might have a project or two that's in our long-term capital plan that gets kicked out a year or two.
That's correct. Just to elaborate a little bit more on the plan, when we talk about the reserve that we have for the capital, after we do our initial budget, then we bring back our long-term capital plan, usually the following month, and that's where we establish the next 5 years. Based off of what the purchase is and which fund it lies in, is then where I, over that next 5 years, will slowly move the projects up with the plan, and I'm accumulating our cash. So it's reserved. It's not necessarily, we say it's restricted. It's not totally restricted, as is our debt service is a restricted. I would classify it as it's assigned for the purpose of capital. So the council does have the ability to move that around when we discuss our plan and we change our capital outlay. Some of the bigger ones that are in there right now that are holding up the majority of the money, just so the council is aware, when I say 9.7, the three biggest ones that are in there, I should probably say 4 now, is the street, building, and land. That's been in the plan for quite a while. An east side fire station, a new city hall, and then potentially some airport improvements. So those are the big ones that are really taking up the mass amount of that reserve.
Thank you. So we have options, and we can bond today because we haven't set money aside for this project.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can use money which was set aside for a different project and maybe bond for that project later.
That's
or
correct. Yep.
not. We
Right.
wouldn't necessarily, it's not a guarantee that we'll have to bond later. Councilman Roby.
So in the scenario where one of the projects we pushed back, if something happened where we had to bring that back forward again, we can do that, and we can bond for that, and quite frankly, make up for lost time, but we still save the money along the way.
Yes.
Bond rates are good right now. There's no guarantee that they will be in the future. That's a chance we take by putting it off, but we will have to bond today if we don't readjust our long-term capital plan.
Right. Or like we said, if there is in the works a few other, even within, the next, 6-7 months, if we decide, we could still do that. The only thing is like I said, with what was approved in the 2020 budget, our projection, if we restrict or assign this as it is, with us not planning on the 1.8, our unreserved fund balance is low. It is not probably where we want to be.
Yeah. Good point. Heath, did you want to say something?
Yeah, if I may, Madam Mayor.
Sure.
As one of the administrators of the CIP and programming some of these long-term projects, especially over the long-term CIP, and as we've reviewed for the 2020 fiscal year, I just wanted to make the note, I love the idea of potentially saving the possibility of having to bond and the charges associated with that. One thing just to keep in mind, just for the council's sake, is just from my experience in the past, 5 years from now, 8 years from now, councils change over. The perception then to bond a specific project may not be politically favored at that time, which could help skew your decision or decide your decision today on whether we bond now or later. If we bond now, today we know why we're doing it, we know what it's for. If we wait, I as an administrator of that CIP, Kristen as an administrator of that CIP, the next mayor as an administrator of that CIP, could risk getting other projects pushed off even further because of the political climate's changing over time and whether or not they would want to bid for specific or bond for specific projects at that point in the future.
Yep. Thank you. Other input? Questions or comments?
This is Glenn. Just a question, Chris. You're comfortable that if we bond today, that we've got the revenue that will facilitate repayment of that bond going forward?
In terms of the repayment of the bond, yes. I mean, we have enough cash flow to do that. This will be, there again, a debt within the capital improvement fund. So that to me isn't any concern. Looks like the annual payment with principal and interest will be around $125,000 to $130,000 each year. So that's not a significant debt right now. I think it's just the question of, do you want to wait and see if there's any other future bonding needs, or do you just want to tie this one into, as Heath kind of stated, we know why we're doing this. We're tying it to our street and stormwater and park improvements, but we know it's because of another project that basically came in and kind of wasn't as planned. So that's kind of up to the council. I think it's if we have to determine if we have anything else coming up, it's probably better to lump it all as one. And the only reason is because you save on your fees.
So if they approve this resolution tonight, we'll move forward with bonding.
Yes.
If the motion fails, we won't bond, but we could come back
We could come
at
back
any time
at any time.
and bond.
We can.
A month from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now.
Yep. That is correct.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
And my point of concern could be addressed as simply as solidifying the memorialization of this, the why we did it. We can have that $1.8 million card in the back of my pocket, in the back of Kristen's pocket at a point in the future when the council's asking, why are we bonding for this project 5 years down the road? It wouldn't be entirely the reason why, but it would be a reason as a reminder of what we did on this action today, and how that could impact our funding in the future. As long as it's memorialized, I guess is what I'm getting at. I think that would put my concerns at ease, and probably most everybody else's too, I'd imagine.
Right, and we can think about the long-term plan, how we want to adjust that to accommodate the money that we used in 2019 that wasn't earmarked for that purpose. Councilman Roby?
So if this motion's defeated, then it can be brought back at next council meeting or the one after that. We can take another swing at it if we want to, if we deem we should.
Correct. Councilman Albertson?
Do we stand any risk of there being costs that we don't know of later on, that as compared to today?
The only big risk would be if anything changes with the interest. I mean, that, you kind of risk that anytime. But otherwise, no, there's really no other costs that up until this point have been associated with this resolution.
So there really isn't any reason to go right now with it. I mean, honestly.
No, the only
It's going to cost us money, and we might need a lump sum larger in 2 months or 6 months.
That's correct. I think the only reason is because I think the thought was that we knew what it was for. So, and we knew it threw off our past planning and our cash. But you're absolutely right. If we know we maybe potentially have some other things coming up, we could put more together as well.
Councilman Roby?
Would it be sound logic to say I'm going to vote no on this because I know as we get further into the long-term capital plan, something may pop up the next month or two that could sway us one way or the other, but we still have a chance we could make that decision then.
Yeah, and I agree with that statement. The other thing is, knowing that there could be potential for future bonding and future debt, hopefully, too, I can provide a little bit more information of what that would look like, so we can see a big picture. And then that way, the council has more information to not only look at this $2 million bond in front of you, but if you want to see what the potential other options would be and what those would look like, we could look into that as well.
And there's some savings in grouping projects together and doing one bond for multiple projects.
Right, because there's always administrative charges anytime you do this. So every time you do it, there's all those administrative charges in there as well. So.
Yes, Councilman Roby.
So let me bring that full circle. If we vote no on this, and then we come back at some future point in time and do bond this out, either individually or with the group, the project that got kicked out could then get brought back in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and the project that we're using this money for is going forward either way. That's not what it's about.
I mean, if we kicked something out in the long-term
Something
capital
else.
plan because of this,
Right.
that gets kicked out. If we end up bonding on this in 2 months from now, we can pull that back
Right.
in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mayor, this is Glenn. Just a comment, we're going to be looking at and I know, Kristen, that you alluded to some of the projects that coming down the road. I guess we're so close to looking at our CIP needs the next 5 years, the next, month or so anyway. I'd be inclined to sit tight on this until we get a closer look at that, and then decide what we might need to do at a little bit later time, and just my 2 cents on it.
Yes, and that is correctly. As I stated, the council will have the option during that process if you want to pull a few things out or push them back a little so that we're not restricting as much. That is an option, especially the $2 million is not, it's a lot of money, but it is not as significant as some of our other bonds that we have done. So to say that we need to bond for $2 million, I don't want anybody to think, oh, you can't even afford $2 million. It's not so much that, it's that we have to know how we're going to plan for that cash flow. Like I said, the city does an excellent job of planning for our capital, so we try not to bond. So even with us working to move some things, I mean, I do believe we can cover it, but I also know that we do have some other projects that are being discussed, and if we do want to bond for those, it might be in the city's best interest to lump it all as one.
Right.
Kristen, this is Adam.
Mm-hmm.
What did you say there was? It was the East Side Fire Station and the airport improvement?
Okay, so probably the biggest 4 that are currently holding up the assigned for capital outlay is the purchase of land and then the street department building. That was one kind of project together. The East Side Fire Station, the new city council administration building that's been in the works, and then multiple airport improvements. Those are the 4.
Yeah, and those are far larger than $2 million. I mean, if we're going to end up funding, even if we know that we're going to go forward with 1 project or 2 projects, if it's me, I'd rather wait and see if that's what we're going to happen in the next 5 to 6 months or 3 months or whatever it is. I mean, that would be my recommendation, I guess.
And I think that's very appropriate. I think just with the timing that the TIF was getting approved, and we had at one point talked about the different ways to finance this. So we brought this forward, and I don't think if we don't go this route, I think that's a fine option as well. So.
Motion we take action on this. I think we all kind of got an idea what it means.
Yep.
Would you state the motion and what a yes and what a no vote means?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that
we already have a motion,
Oh,
Michael.
So the motion that is on the table right now is to approve the resolution. And if the council votes yes on this, then I will proceed to bond for $2 million. If the council votes no and denies it, then it stops right there.
The project still moves forward.
Project still moves forward. It's just the bonding.
Yep. Is that clear? Anyone have any question about that? All right. If there are no further questions, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay.
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 Motion fails. All right. Item number 11 is approval of resolution number 19-36, the plat of Gulfview Estates 13th edition, and the authorization for the mayor to sign a development agreement for the plat of Gulfview Estates 13th edition. I have a motion by Albertson and a second by Oline. Sorry. Okay, and I would like Heath to explain this to us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. This is a plat of Gulfview Estates, 13th edition, and it is inclusive of, I believe, 6 residential lots, and the plat exhibit is included with the request for council action information. One of the points to call out here is that this does include a development agreement, as does the filing of any plat within the city. We require certain public improvements with any plats. Just to give a quick background here on the development agreement, before that plat can be filed, those public improvements either have to be constructed or the developer has to enter into a development agreement with the city committing them to performing the construction of those public improvements. This particular plat, there aren't many public improvements remaining from previous plats, but there are a few drainage components that are hanging out there from Gulfview Estates 12th edition. And what we've done on this development agreement that's part of this action item tonight is include those drainage items to be incorporated in that development agreement with the approval of this plat and authorizing the mayor to sign that development agreement. Brandy Hanton, our urban planner, is here tonight as well. If you have any more specific questions, we'd be glad to help handle them.
Thank you, Heath. And this subdivision has been platted 1 or 2 lots at a time over a period of many, many years. So this finalizes it, right? Yep. So they'll all be platted, every lot will be platted.
Yep, and then all the infrastructure improvements will be completed too.
All right, Councilman Roby?
Can you put it up on a map? I get perspective on where that goes, the big picture. And while you're doing that, I have a question. The last time we just did approve an agreement here recently, there wasn't, the name escapes me, the name of the agreement that had to do with the drainage and all that. What was that called, Heath?
The BMP development agreement
Yes.
or maintenance agreement?
Yes. We have one of those on this?
That's a good question. It should have been exercised with one of the original development agreements that went in place on one of the earlier phases of the development. I don't know if you know that off the top of your head, Brandy.
That was before we started doing this, wasn't it?
I believe that we memorialized one with Gulfview Estates 12th edition.
Oh, okay.
And then we also had them submit a deed restriction for that drainage area, just so that in the future that somebody couldn't come and subdivide that, being that that's what its function is for detention.
So there is a BMP on this project?
Yes, I believe so.
I can't vote for it unless there is one.
Can you look and see?
Well, the BMP would be the detention pond that would be the permanent best management practice that's in place to handle the runoff from the subdivision.
That detention pond was dedicated many, many years ago, and we weren't doing BMP development agreements. Brandy was saying she thinks that we did one recently, like last year or so, or 2 years ago. Heath, if you can look in the plat file. Brandy, do you have access? You don't have access.
Unless I sign in.
Hey, Brandy, this is Adam. Is that detention pond in Block 2 of Golf Course Edition?
Yes. It is.
I know.
Sorry, it's Block 2.
Yeah. Okay. I know we did that at planning and zoning. That had to be about 4 to 6 months ago because they actually put in that the waterway restrictions and stuff like that on. Was it block 23 and 22? I believe they put it in so that we'd always have access to it.
Yep, because then there's a berm that runs across those lots. So we have
I believe that's what they had to do, correct, to finalize that?
Yep, because they had to go back in. We re-reviewed this entire subdivision. And then when we were looking at Gulfview Estates 12th, means that the preliminary plan was expired. So then we had their engineers go in and make sure that everything was built to spec. And then that's where some of these things were noticed, that the berm needed a little more fill, and then also that the culvert needed replacing. It was damaged. So those are the things that we also included on this development agreement with the same timeline as what we approved for Gulfview Estates 12.
Hopefully that answers your question there, Don.
Yes, Councilman Roby.
So the road on the south of that, the bottom of the pass, 4th Avenue. It's Golf
Course Road.
I need the perspective.
Yeah, sorry, Councilman Roby. That is Golf Course Road on the south side of this area.
So Derby Downs is right over to the right there, at the bottom.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I drive by that a lot. Isn't it pretty wet in there?
Yes.
Let me rephrase that. Isn't it really wet in there?
The bike trail's still underwater.
And the reason why I'm asking that, are they going to put basements in those houses?
No, we had them include the lowest finished floor when we had them update their preliminary plan.
So it's slabs or crawl space?
Well, it's restricted to under this certain elevation. So I would imagine they could do either. If they were bringing fill in and they were building it up, that they were meeting that elevation where there's not, where it's not going to be wet.
Well, I'll ask the layperson question. How often are the sump pumps going to run there, and how much are they going to run into the street?
So to address that, Councilman Roby, the finished floor elevation that Brandy alluded to that is on the preliminary plans should, I'll emphasize the word should, correlate with an average groundwater elevation that was observed through the design of the subdivision. That is definitely something we could follow up on and see exactly what the preliminary plan shows for elevations. And then if those elevations look appropriate, what that would mean is that, as we discussed here a month or two ago, how we have the ordinance in place already, or the regulation in place already, that requires the home builder to build that finished floor elevation at least, I forget the depth now off the top of my head, but at least a certain depth above that average groundwater depth. And so if all the pieces of the puzzle are in place here, that should be protected from happening to an egregious level. On a wet year like this, obviously the groundwater elevation will fluctuate and would cause for sumps to run more frequently than an average year would.
The detention pond is staying in private ownership here, correct? And there's a deed restriction on the land. Is that true?
Correct. I'm looking at that right now. But Don, I did not find, we don't have a BMP development agreement for this pond.
I would have a tough time voting for it without one. I think every development should have one of those.
Councilman Albertson?
Randy, that piece of property has been underwater all summer. I mean, there's standing water in there from, I'm going to say April 1st, and there's still standing water in that whole thing. So I think Don's right on that we better have that agreement, or I think we're going to get big trouble out of it because it's soaking wet. The neighbors there to the north, I don't know if they have basements. It looks like there might be a basement or two there, but the water has been at their doorsteps all summer long. So I think he's right on. I think we have to really make sure that we are doing the right thing for people if they happens to be a dry year next year and so the water's gone. That looks good, but then you get a year like this and there has to be a very good drainage situation there. It'll be a disaster.
Right.
So your concern is that we would want to be having a document in hand that clearly states whose responsibility the pond is and who's going to maintain it and gives us rights to go on the property, and that's what a BMP development agreement does, gives us the right to go in there and do the work if they're not doing the work to make sure the pond is functioning properly. And is that what you're looking for?
Two things. I think the homeowner deserves some protection on that, such that they have water problems and it wasn't engineered properly or executed properly. There's a recourse for the homeowner. And the second thing is, we just got done redoing the streets up in Northridge, in about half their regular life because water management issues, and there was, I believe, construction issues with the road. We keep building in these wet areas, and then we spend money earlier than we should have to fix things up. So I'd certainly like to see us go forward if they want to move forward, but I think the BMP is, I think, important.
Well, and I think that rather than pull this because there's no BMP, you could approve it with the caveat that the plat isn't recorded until that development agreement is executed. And then it would go as a package together to the courthouse. Or do you just want to pull it off?
What I'm wondering too, it's typical for residential developments that the city would take over the ponds, the regional ponds. And I'm wondering if that, would you prefer that route instead of having the BMP maintenance agreement? Or would you rather we execute that document and keep it in private ownership? Because it's just typical, because when there's a residential subdivision, then in perpetuity, the developer's gone. Once everything's built out, then there isn't anybody there to maintain it. So it is typical that the city does take over those detention ponds.
Madam Mayor, if I may chime in on that. Brandy does bring up a good point that it is typical for residential subdivision detention ponds to be taken over by the city. I would heed caution to that until I had time to personally review some of the history on this pond. I don't know if there's reasons why we decided not 2 years ago, prior to my time being here, and if those reasons would still be valid yet today on why we would not want to take this one over. But I would like to do some more fact finding before we did go in that direction. But she does bring up a very good point that is common for the residential subdivision ponds to be accepted by the city as public infrastructure.
They do have a homeowners association, and I think that it's Gulfview Estates Inc. that owns the pond. And I'm personally, I really don't want to take over ownership of ponds, particularly if the property owner isn't asking us to. And this property owner is not asking us to take it over. I would prefer a BMP agreement that gives us the right to go on to the property and demand that the maintenance be done if necessary and protect the city from that perspective. And if they're not maintaining it and it's backing up and causing flooding problems in the neighborhood, then we have some authority to go in there and order that done through that agreement, which would be recorded in perpetuity. So I think that's a really good idea to put one there. It's our standard practice now, but this was inching along through the years. Actually, I think this subdivision had a restriction of no basements when it was first platted many years ago. And the landowners that purchased it objected, came to the city, got that restriction removed, and people had problems out there. We've been our staff members have been criticized from both directions. Criticized for restricting basements to be constructed. Leave that to me. If I want to do that to myself and it's at risk of flooding, that's my problem. You shouldn't be involved. To the other side of, what? You allowed them to build this basement, now I own it and it floods every year? You knew that was going to be a problem and you let it happen anyway? Can't seem to win.
You're right. To address those 2 points, and the first one, then they should take responsibility for the pond, and they should take responsibility for the roads in perpetuity, because that's all that water gets pumped out, ruins the road, ruins the base, and the city gets hung out on the bill. If we're going to take them over, then we've been through this a number of times where we've got the wet issues in town. We keep building on marshland or wet areas, and it costs us a lot of money down the road. At some point, we've got to figure out a solution to this. So if they're going to build in that wet area, then I don't know why anybody would put a basement in there.
Right, and we do have on the record, this neighborhood has had people with problems with water in their basements, and this elevation restriction should prevent that for the new houses, but doesn't do anything for the others. Councilwoman Manti?
I strongly agree with Don about the roads as well, though. And it's a private homeowners, it's a, well, it is, but I mean, it was created, she named what it was.
Gulfview Estates, Inc.
Right, and it is not unusual for homeowners associations to maintain private roads within their association boundaries.
But these are public roads. The roads are already built. There are roads to maintain in perpetuity. The pond, on the other hand, no. The pond is private, always has been. And there may be reasons the city may not have wanted the pond back when this was first platted, or maybe the property owner is not here to speak about this, so we're guessing. We don't know what the reason was, but the pond is not currently publicly owned, and it's not intended to be publicly owned at this point.
Mayor, this is Adam again. Brandy, what was when that came through the planning and zoning commission? I mean, what did they say on that as far as having to put those berms in? Because that couldn't have been more than 3-4 months ago.
As far as the timeline?
Yeah, I mean, what did they say, that they had to put that in for the drainage?
Yeah.
Is that what it was for?
Yep, so that will protect, so that's what they would anticipate, that would hold back water, and then it would convey it to the overflow structure. And then, and so that's what they reviewed last year. And then, so they have 2 years to get all of those improvements completed.
Okay, so it sounds like we're ready to go. I'm okay with that, Don, if you want to make that, or whoever put the motion out, to make sure that they have a best management practice on it before it can be filed.
Just for a point of clarity, the 2 years of completion of those drainage improvements we kept in this development agreement, equivalent to what they would have been from the 12th edition agreement. We did not extend that another 2 years under this agreement, is what I'm trying to say.
Not for this new agreement, for that retention bond?
Those improvements are already included in this 13th edition agreement with the same completion date as the last agreement.
Which is what?
When?
July 11th, 2020.
So next summer. Councilman Roby?
I need you to clarify, these improvements are already included. What does that mean?
This development agreement outlines the remaining detention pond improvements that we made a requirement of under the 12th edition development agreement. There are a handful of detention pond adjustments that needed to be made that we outlined in the 12th edition agreement. We've simply carried those same requirements over into this 13th edition development agreement with the exact same completion date as the 12th edition agreement.
So specifically, the improvements were to replace the existing CMP culvert with an RCP culvert with flared ends on both sides, to install an overflow structure concurrent to the replacement of the culvert, a deed restriction be submitted and recorded for the detention pond area, which has been completed and recorded, and then that the berm shown on lot 22 shall not encroach within the lot lines and shall be revised upon platting.
So the lot lines were adjusted to go, not including the berm. That was done as part of this plat?
Yep.
Okay.
And I believe when they made those improvements to the berm, that was done before we entered into the development agreement. So, because they did have to, they raised it like by like an inch, maybe not even an inch, not much.
Okay. The detention pond is currently owned by the, you can click on it, Heath, and see who the owner is. I believe it's Gulfview Estates LLC. And it will stay. Is that what it says?
It does say Gulfview Estates, but it doesn't have an owner. I think it might be under the wrong heading.
You need to have the...
Oh, it's...
You can't see the ownership? I can't read that from here.
It doesn't have an owner, but it doesn't say the city of Watertown.
It doesn't have an owner?
No, so instead of like...
an address?
No, this does not clearly show on here who the ownership falls under on our GIS data. It is clearly owned by somebody, it's just not showing our GIS data.
Do you think the county's GIS would be any different? Aren't ours the same?
It's the
I
same
can check.
database. I don't think it would be different, but maybe. Yes, Councilman Albertson.
Brandy, maybe it's one for you, maybe it's Heath, I don't know, but with the changes you're talking about, the berm and the retention pond, is that adequate to take care of that water situation? There's a real problem there.
Well, and that's what is not allowing them to complete the construction this year. Otherwise, they wanted to get that overflow structure and the culvert replaced. Because of the wet year, they haven't been able to get in there.
Is that tiled or anything, or what's going to move that water from the west side to the east side to go out of there?
I believe that the area can encompass that detention. But so is it it's ponding and not, it's not flowing like it's supposed to?
The groundwater is probably so high that it's above ground there.
Okay.
It's saturated and nowhere to go.
Councilman Hoyer, I just have a question and a comment, I guess. Kind of wondering in general, when we did that last development by, I think it's Cherry Road up in the northeast, they were talking about doing the apartment buildings and stuff, and they ended up deciding to do slab on grade. Was that kind of just put into the agreement when we approved it? Because like this, I'm really on board with Don right now, but I'm not convinced that putting a basement out there in any situation really makes a lot of sense, because we already determined last time we were talking about this that the average groundwater height is pretty much just a guess game every time, because we don't have a consistent system of measuring that anymore. It's just somebody drills a hole, looks at it for a week, and then makes a call. And if this has been flooding consistently, I don't know. It doesn't feel very responsible, even if it's maybe infringing on some form of a freedom, but like, it doesn't feel responsible letting somebody put in a basement that's going to pump into the street, which is going to degrade a road that we again have to replace, when we could have just said slab on grade from the start, and then somebody can build it appropriately and hope we spare somebody from a pretty nasty headache. I mean, the other question is this in a floodplain?
Yes. Yes, this property is.
So, I mean, again, that kind of just looks like, I almost think it's irresponsible of us to even approve it with any option to put a basement in. If it's in the floodplain like that, we already see standing water, and we could spare a lot of the headache from the get-go by restricting it to something.
Never mind.
It's not in the floodplain.
My bad.
And I think that the normal way, this is an old subdivision. Most of the houses are already constructed. There's only a few lots that aren't built on. The roads were built years ago. We already own them. And they left a few lots here and there unplatted and unbuildable. No building right until they plat. So they were platting, and this is how this came about. Back in the day when this was originally platted, they were required to put a detention pond in, and they did. And they didn't plat all their lots. So we go through time, things change. The part of our code that requires floor elevations to be shown to be 2 feet above the groundwater table elevation, that's been done on some document, but we didn't do the document that normally contains that information. So it's in some other document. And how do we memorialize those elevations? You said that we got those elevations. Where did we put them?
How have we memorialized those? Is that what you're
Well,
asking?
that's
here?
what Brandy said.
On the preliminary plan?
Did we redo the preliminary plan?
Yeah.
Oh, we did?
With Gulfview Estates 12th, we did because it was expired.
Okay. So now we have, with just those remaining few lots, the elevation, which is several feet above the groundwater elevation. And if they put a basement in, they're going to have a lot of fill around it up to the first floor, because we all know where the groundwater is. It's pretty much at the surface right now. So that information is known and was gathered in the same way that we did for the newer developments, where they have to put their lowest floor elevation right on the preliminary plan. So that should protect that. Those last few houses will probably not have basements, but like the former Councilman Danforth said, he did have to comply with those rules when he built his house, and he wanted a basement, so he just elevated it and put a lot of fill around his house. And so there are ways. I mean, to say you can't put a basement in is really not what we're getting at. What we're getting at is where is the elevation of that lowest finished floor? Should be a couple of feet above the groundwater elevation. And then you won't have the continuous sump pump problems.
That is correct, and a building permit would not be issued on a plan that showed the lowest finished floor below 2 feet above the groundwater elevation.
Right, which is our current standard. So, Councilwoman Manti?
Okay, so if those lots can be filled or whatever they need to be at this time, okay, now are we causing an additional issue with runoff from those raised lots, elevated lots, to some of the neighboring lots? Or is that gonna have to be worked into the plan where that water gets off of those lots? Do you see what I'm saying? That if you got two lots here at the end that are, you know, built up higher,
Every house that comes in has to do a site plan, and the building services department goes through and makes sure they're not creating a hardship for a neighbor. Generally, it has to run off to the street or to the back where the drainage is supposed to flow. So that, yes, they're going to create a problem for themselves, unless they put in a retaining wall, which is very expensive, and they probably won't. So the bottom line is they probably won't put a basement in. To put a basement in would be extraordinarily expensive to comply with all of the extra stuff that they have.
I could just see it creating a bigger mess. You know?
Right. Right. But that's a good question. Other questions? We have a motion which does not include the suggested BMP development agreement, so if that's something we need to do, then the motion would need to be amended.
Just to clarify too, I did find that Gulfview Estates Inc. is the owner of that detention pond area.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Mayor,
Yes.
I guess would we need to make a counter motion from the initial one that was?
To add a requirement to it?
Yes.
You could make it a proposed amendment to the original motion.
I would make a proposed amendment to require a BMP upon this.
Okay, prior to recording?
Prior to recording, yes.
1 second.
Okay, so we have an amendment to the motion by Holeen and seconded by Rademski. Is there any discussion on that amendment? Is there any discussion on the motion as amended?
Should take a vote on the amendment
Okay,
first.
all right, we'll take a vote on amending the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Okay, the motion is officially amended. Now, is there any further discussion? All right, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, item number 12 is approval of resolution number 19-35, the plat of Terex, South Dakota, first edition, and authorization for the mayor to sign a stormwater best management practice development agreement for the plat of Terex, South Dakota, first edition. We have a motion by Holeen and a second by Manti. And I would like Heath to tell us about this.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will apologize and note that things are getting better in our processes, but this one is a little bit of an inverse of the previous action in that we have already executed a general development agreement with Terex some time back. But you'll note on this action, we are now referencing specifically the BMP development agreement in relation to their detention pond maintenance responsibilities. So just as a background there, that's why we don't have a general development agreement with Terex on this action, because we've already approved that in previous actions with the numerous actions that we've gone through with Terex over the past year and a half. But tonight's action is a formalization of the plat that they were required to submit to us. What this plat accomplished was the establishment of the Terex lot boundaries and the formalization of the 17th Avenue right-of-way in there, and then all the associated easements on that plat, several of which are private drainage easements for their responsibility for future ownership and maintenance of their detention structures. And there are some public utility easements as well within the plat. Again, Urban Planner Brandy Hanton is here this evening and can help answer any more specifics between her and I that you might have.
Right, it looks like there's 2 ponds. Is that true?
Yes.
And does this
There's
development-
actually 3 areas. And the BMP development agreement does address that.
So is one an oval shape and 2 rectangles? Or where's the third?
The third one is up north.
Okay, that's an oval one.
It's not printed right.
And they're retaining ownership and responsibility for maintenance on all 3.
Yes.
And that's clear in the development, the best management practice development agreement?
Yes, it should be. I'm going to pull it up here because that was the amended development agreement. So the one that was not in your original packet.
That was handed out.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm going to pull it up here.
Exhibit B. Is Exhibit A the grading plan that shows the ponds? Yeah, I see it.
Yep.
And then Exhibit B is the maintenance considerations.
Yep.
Okay. It's our standard format. They've added in the legal description and the description of what the agreement applies to. It addresses them with the exhibits. Does anybody have any questions?
Mayor, this is Adam. Is this going to be a privately maintained facility then?
Yes.
Yep.
Any other questions? All right, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. All right, we've already done item 13, so we'll move on to item 14, the first reading of ordinance number 19-10, approving and establishing the zoning designation of C3 Highway Commercial District for the tract of land to be known as Endry's Third Edition, subject to all planning requirements. And there's no action required here, it's just a first reading, but I'd like Heath to explain a little bit more about it.
Thank you, Mayor. So the owner of this particular area wishes to annex and zone the property. The future, the annexation plat correlates to the second reading of the rezone, which is scheduled to be on the next council meeting. This being just the first reading of this rezone ordinance. The property is owned by Bob Endries and is located south of Highway 212 and east of 23rd Street Southeast. It's approximately 19 acres in size, and upon annexation is proposed to be zoned C3 Highway Commercial District. The Planning Commission approved the annexation and zoning of the Endry's Third Edition unanimously at the August 8th, 2019 meeting. And pulling up the Exhibit A. It shows the area to be annexed and zoned to C3. It's up on my screen right now. Thank you, Spencer. The hopes of the annexation and subsequent subdivision of this area is driven by the extension, the desire for the developer to extend 10th Avenue through his property, and that street extension planned to support future and subsequent development of any future lots that he might plat through there. And again, we'd be glad to help answer any questions you might have.
So this annexation will leave 2 lots or 2 pieces of land outside the city limits that will be completely surrounded by the city limits. And the city did write a letter, correct, notifying them of that and requesting that they would annex as well so that we'd have continuity. Did we receive a response?
No, and I sent those out on Thursday.
Thursday
I
last
believe,
week?
Yep, via certified mailings.
Okay, so they maybe, have you gotten the cards back?
Not that I'm aware. Once Lori gets both of them back, then she does hand them to me, but, so I don't think that she has yet.
Okay. So it would be neat and clean to have not little pockets of unincorporated area within our boundaries. But if that happens, it's, it's not the first time and it's not the end of the world, but we'd like to clean it up if the owners are in favor of that. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, Madam Mayor, that was one of the concerns I had was leaving. It's actually, they're 2 separate parcels, the back half of some residential lots here that would remain unannexed, and the entire remaining area around here would all become annexed with these subsequent actions. So we have reached out via that letter to encourage them to sign a petition. And from a planning standpoint, to eliminate any county islands within the municipality, that's always the best practice, so you don't run into any zoning conflicts and things of that nature on those kind of remnant island areas.
So this is for anybody that's confused, the area by Culver's and Walmart that still has farm on it.
Mayor or Heath, can you add this, or Glenn? Can you explain what happens to the current assets, the farm assets that are on there as this gets annexed and then subsequently developed?
Yes, thank you, Councilman Vilhauer. Brandy, could you elaborate? This was actually discussed in detail at the Planning Commission level, and Brandy can share that information as far as the current use out there and what that looks like in moving forward.
Yep, so this in the county is ag land and obviously a bunch of farm buildings on it. So once it's annexed, and I did have a conversation with the property owner, Bob Endress, to make him aware that once this is brought into the highway commercial district, he's still going to have to plat and subdivide. So at that time, he would probably be creating nonconformities. And so as the farm exists today, if something were to go away because of unforeseen circumstances, then they couldn't come back as they are today.
So if a tornado blew it away, they couldn't rebuild because it will be non-conforming once it's.
And something else to note as far as subdividing goes, they are within the Sioux Rural Water Territory, and so when they come in and once they plat, now being this is commercial property, it's $5,000 per lot upon platting, so that is something that they are aware of as well. Currently, they're served by a private well.
Okay.
But just to clarify, the process of the annexation itself does not require removal of the assets that are on there currently, correct?
Yep. Nope. It does not.
Thank you.
Yep.
This is Adam. Question on that. I know that's all C3 commercial, but if you look along the lines on that zoning, with the surrounding zoning, are we going to see this come through as industrial for part of that? Essentially, it was at 10th Avenue South. I mean, all that's industrial all along there, and then C3 to the north of that. Are we going to see another zoning change come through?
No. I think that our boundary line, are you talking about the vicinity map?
Yeah, yes.
That is not currently annexed. That's a part of this annexation. So it's just a flaw in the GIS.
I understand that, but it shows I-1 essentially from 10th Avenue south down minus the actual property that's getting annexed in. And
Yeah,
it's C3 to the north of that.
And to that note, Councilman Lallam, you bring up a good point. What we have before you is what the owner wants to do with his land at this point as far as zoning is concerned. And there weren't any concerns at the planning commission level of whether this should be I-1 as opposed to C3. I think you can make sound justifications for either. But if the city council had concerns with that, I mean, obviously that rests on your decisions here on whether to proceed with the C3 zoning as opposed to whether the community would feel it better suited as an I-1 zoning district.
Did Mr. Andrews request that to be a C3?
That's correct.
From the looks of it, it appears like that should have been I-1 at 10th Avenue South and C3 North. But I mean, I don't have an issue with that. If they sell it as one parcel, it's a whole different story.
And we could see another rezone in the future, but being that he hasn't subdivided yet either, just bringing it in as one zoning district is much cleaner.
Sure.
And at least the C3 is more restrictive than the I-1 would be.
Yeah, I just looked at it and you look at it, it's all on my picture. It's pink, but I mean that's it's a concern I would have if it's surrounded by industrial and then they decide to put one in. But I mean it is a first reading, so.
Right, and whether they zoned it C3 or I-1, it would be immediately contiguous to either of those zones. So it's not, I mean, those are big pieces of land to be commercial. You can see the commercial goes south and, it is somewhat of a checkerboard, but they're pretty big parcels. And it's possible that we'd see a rezone request for that industrial zone property, which is currently west of Walmart, because it'll be sandwiched between two commercial zones. It's not currently developed, correct?
Correct.
So yes, and there's an argument for either way. The owner has requested C3. It's immediately contiguous to C3, so that's not a stretch.
Yeah, and I could see them coming back and platting that out and looking at industrial, on a lot by lot basis. So I don't have an issue with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I wanted to just make the point too, to Councilman Lallam's point, that you're exactly right. That could happen. The owner could subsequently apply for another rezone down the road. You're absolutely right.
Any other questions? All right, there's no action required, so we'll just move on. Item number 15 is the first reading of ordinance number 19-11, amending chapter 3.01 of the revised ordinances of the city of Watertown regarding dangerous and vicious dogs. And I'll let Matt kick this off. I know we have some folks here that might want to talk about this.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the culmination of about a years-long discussion with the Animal Control Board. We went through various iterations, and the purpose of it was to one, I guess, was to give us a more solid mechanism to euthanize an animal if need be, if we determine that an animal is a vicious animal. Another purpose of this was to allow for the dangerous classification for animals that have attacked other animals. And finally, it provides kind of a distinction between dangerous and vicious dogs, whereas dangerous animals are less dangerous, I guess, than a vicious animal. And so I would let Councilwoman Manti chime in as she would like, or I see we have a member of the Animal Control Board here as well.
Councilwoman Manti?
I guess Matt pretty much summarized it. I'd be glad to answer any questions that anybody has. Dr. Reeb, our veterinarian representative of the council, is here, or council, the board is here as well. We have spent a lot of time making sure that we've thought through each process, including, remedy for the owners, it requiring things like insurance for the dogs so that there's a way for people who may have been attacked or have medical bills as a result of the attack, have somebody to pay for it, things like that. So we really thought through each piece and made sure that both the dog and the owner and the people who were attacked, or everybody's pretty much has a remedy or a covered in this new ordinance. Does that sound about right, Mark? I think I'm getting a nod. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Yeah, and the thing that we like the most about this, or the two things I guess that I feel strongest about, is one is we've really never had the power to remove a very dangerous dog or very vicious dog from a situation. We've had what we call multiple offenders, dogs that have done severe damage to a human in several occasions before we are even able to remove the dog. Now, if the situation warrants it, law enforcement can remove that dog immediately if they sense that there's a danger to the community. And that's something I really feel good about because we've never had that before. It just took too long, and by the time we would get a way to remove that dog, it could have attacked again. And that's one that really makes a difference for me. This one gives a lot of guidance to law enforcement so that they're not guessing. I think we made it very clear and worked with the police department to make sure that the language was clear for the officers so that they weren't in, what do I do now? I think this is also reflected in the changes. So
this will go in just a couple of comments. This definitely is a safety issue for the public, and I know you're always treading on sacred territory when you start dealing with people's pets, but it really is a public safety issue as for the public, humans, as well as for other animals, other dogs. And I really appreciate the effort the Animal Control Board has gone through in getting this before us, and really strongly encourage that we vote in favor of this when the time comes in a couple of weeks. The question I've got is, just curious, has anyone received any kind of feedback? I know the public opinion ran a front page story on this a couple of weeks ago. Beth and the Animal Control Board made a presentation at the committee meeting a couple of weeks ago. Has anyone received any feedback on this, either pro or con relative or to this since those presentation and that media exposure?
Doesn't look like it.
I got 2 volunteers for the Animal Control Board out of it.
Yeah.
So that's good.
I would, Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
I would make a comment that some of the commentary that I've observed, both in regards to this ordinance and throughout the country as this issue comes up in different communities, is that people are very supportive of it not relating to the breed of the dog, and whereas it relates to simply the dog's actions and temperament and that sort of thing. So it has nothing to do with the breed, but it just simply has to do with the dog's actions.
Right. Councilman Y?
Beth, do we have any issues currently with the dangerous or vicious dogs in Watertown that the Animal Control Board or the police department is dealing with?
I guess I'd have to, we are made aware of them as they come through. We're told that the warrant has been issued, or the declaration has been issued, and the owner then has a opportunity to appeal that and ask for a hearing. We have a hearing before us in the near future to ask to overturn the declaration. As of right now, I don't know that we've seized any kind of, or that we have any kind of dogs that have attacked severely. I haven't gotten notice of it. That's why I'm looking to answer people's questions. I'm looking at some law enforcement people. What's been really effective for us is, the use of our law enforcement all has body cams. That really helps the situation when there's questions and the hearings, and appeals. While nothing can be retroactive until this is, so example, this all becomes effective at unapproved and when whatever time has to be. But if there's a dog that's being naughty now, those past behaviors will impact if he does something in the future after the approval of this. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to comment, we are aware of, within the last few months,
Oh, yes.
however, that not by the city's actions, but there was a lawsuit brought against an owner of a dog, and the judge in that case did order that dog euthanized.
Yeah.
And it was a dog that had previously offended in Watertown, so it is an issue.
Mm-hmm. I forgot about that one. You're right. I was just glad that the dog was dealt with appropriately. Yep.
All right. Other questions or comments? Thanks for all your work on this. No action tonight. The next meeting will be second reading and action. No public hearing, or is there? No. Yeah. All right. Item number 16 is authorization for the mayor to sign a local infrastructure improvement grant application for $75,000 for the detention ponds related to the Terex development. Have a motion by Holene and a second. Was it Don? All right. Any, let's see. I guess I'll ask Heath to describe this, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So this item is related to, again, past commitments from the past year and a half that we've made with Terex. And moving forward with this one in particular includes the application to the state of South Dakota, the Governor's Office of Economic Development. This is an application that will be made by the city on behalf of Terex, who is the developer. What this grant program does is allows for local infrastructure improvements to be funded. It's an economic development tool that the state has established over the past several years. It is a part of the Build South Dakota Funds program through the state. If this were executed tonight, if the authorization was given for the mayor to sign this application, we would essentially be carrying out our commitments that were agreed upon between the city, the Watertown Development Company, the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and Terex, who all were party to this discussion of the GOED funding $75,000 towards Terex detention ponds, drainage structures that need to be constructed on that site. And that's the action tonight. If this were approved and subsequently the grant is approved, there would be an agreement coming forth as well to the city to execute. Again, with us as the applicant, we would be the executors of that agreement as well, but this does not commit the city any financial obligations towards these improvements. It's 100% funded through this program and no financial obligations on the city's behalf.
All right, thank you. Kristen, did you want to add anything to that?
Nope. Heath covered it all. No match from the city, and we're a pass-through.
Right, okay. Any questions by anyone, council? Pretty straightforward. All right, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Item 17 is authorization for the mayor to sign the Joint Powers Financial and Maintenance Agreement with the South Dakota Department of Transportation for traffic signal improvements associated with their intersection improvement project. Have a motion by Helene and a second by Manti, and I will again ask Heath to tell us about this.
Thank you, Mayor. This item, I was approached by some DOT staff probably a good few months ago, and they were gearing up and inquiring whether the city would have interest in participating in this program. Generally speaking, what it is the DOT has federal monies available to them through the Highway Safety Improvement Program from the feds, and the state would be 100% responsible for the cost of this project. And what this project includes is a simple replacement and upgrading of what we call traffic signal head backplates. If you'll notice, every traffic signal head, the traditional 3-section signal head will have a black backplate that surrounds it. And what those backplates do is help provide just a little bit better visibility to those traffic signals. They give some contrast from the actual the color component of the signal head to the surrounding skyline, whatever might be there, whether it's buildings or blue sky. One of these advancements, though, that have come to light through the Federal Highway Administration is the implementation of a retro-reflective backplate that goes around traffic signal heads. And what that includes, you may be seeing these in some communities already, is a yellow strip of retro-reflective material on that backplate surface. And so the DOT has targeted 4 intersections throughout Watertown that they felt that the traffic counts were significant enough that these backplate upgrades would be warranted. Those 4 intersections include Willow Creek Drive and 19th Street Northeast, 1st Avenue North and Broadway, 1st Avenue North and 2nd Street East, and then 11th Street East and 3rd Avenue North. In conversations with the DOT, they would also be upgrading their own traffic signals on the highway routes, the state highway system throughout town as well. And this is 100%, again, funded 100% by the DOT. They manage the project, but they do need to execute this joint powers agreement with them.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for Heath?
Mayor or Heath, this is Glenn. Not specifically on this, whatever became of the planned pedestrian crossing light that was going to go in at the intersection of Kemp and 81 after we converted that to a 2-way?
Would you like to take that, Heath?
I would. So that is still in the works. It's meant to be finalized. The mayor and I both had communications with the DOT regarding that, knowing that we would like to get that Hawk system installed and complete. I think that their attention was put on other projects that they felt had higher priority, one of them being a traffic signal analysis on Highway 212 over towards the Terry Redlin Arts Center. And rightfully so, they've been just short-staffed in completing both those efforts. And so we've tried to call their attention back to that particular location and get that project finalized. But it is in the works, and unfortunately for you tonight, I don't have an estimated time of arrival for the completion, but I do know that it is still in the works.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? All right, look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item 18 is authorization for the Vinteeks Car Club to close off a portion of Kemp Avenue and the south end of city-owned parking lot adjacent to County Fair for the annual Vinteeks Rod Run on Saturday, September 7th, 2019. I have a motion by Helene.
Make a motion to approve.
Second by Y. Sorry, it's you had a little bit of delay. I think that was Adam. Yeah. So this is a fun event, and I see Bill Riefenberger's here to talk about it. We do this every year, and you want to tell us a little bit about it, Bill?
This year's the 40th.
Oh, Wow.
I don't know, I've lost track, but I think it's been about 25 years for myself, but it's actually the 40th anniversary of the car show, which was in probably other places at one time, but for at least the 25 years I've been on, it's been downtown. Back when I was on the council, we always just did the car show on Kemp and never asked anybody, it just happened. But I got to thinking at that time, maybe an issue comes up later on, well, the car club can do it and nobody has to ask anybody, so I thought maybe we should make this a more formal presentation so that it's approved, and that way anybody else has anything, at least there's a process where they can't point to us and say that, we're doing something, why can't they? But also, when we started doing that too, we've asked for the parking lot to the south of County Fair, because we decided after a few years that it's better to have some of the vendors, food vendors and such over there for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of the car people really don't like grease and stuff going around near their cars. And I think it's more practical for the other businesses that are up there to use their sidewalks and have that available to them. And it's worked out really good the last 3 years, and don't know that we have any issues. Just for practical purposes, what happens is on Saturday morning about 7 o'clock, team of guys come uptown. The city brings up some additional garbage because the ones that are up there aren't adequate enough. They put those around. They put some signs up to say no parking after 10 o'clock. That way business can go on until about that time. We hire a couple of off-duty police officers that come up through the police department and kind of check, make sure there's no cars in the way, that if there's anybody, they ask them to get those moved off. About 11 o'clock, the cars start parking. The show opens up at noon. It's done at 4 o'clock. But the purpose of that is just basically to make sure everybody knows what's going on. A couple years ago, we did take Maple. That's obviously doesn't work this year anyway, but we've been able to get by. We had 400 cars. We're at like 350 generally the last couple of years, so it works well enough to go through from basically down. It starts from just what's the GSI used to be the
First.
Yep.
First Street West.
So we start at that half block because if we go through that block back over to Veters, then it blocks off a parking lot over there. So we start there. We leave Broadway open. Maple's normally blocked off. It is anyway now this year, and then Second is blocked off also. And then we go, generally filters on down past the Senior Citizen Center. But that parking lot that has a fountain over there is where and most of the food vendors for the most part are some type of nonprofit group that set up over there. So, and there's, those are open to contact us, and there is, as far as the car club goes, nobody gets charged anything for being there. We just need to coordinate the space. That's the only thing.
Right. Well, I appreciate that you came and asked for formal approval, and it also gives us a chance to talk about it a little bit. It's a very, very fun event, and it draws big crowds. The cars are amazing to look at, and there's just a huge variety.
Yeah, well, obviously we had a lot of people come to see the cars, much less and the cars start coming in town earlier in the week. Usually the Memorial Park is pretty much booked up way ahead of time for that because it's full. And we did change something a couple years ago where we used to have the cars meet out to Memorial Park in the morning, Saturday morning. We took buses and they had garage tours and we had some events for the ladies. But we changed that up, and we still have the garage tours, but we asked them to drive their cars to different places. So we're trying to get them circulating around town just to kind of let people, see these things, what's going on. Otherwise, it just all happens real fast. This way, they got a little more opportunity to see that. And we do have something going on at the city auditorium for the women that choose to that are registered with a car. That there's some painting thing going on down there that they're going to have available to them, so they can just walk direct from downtown. So, so yeah, it's been fun and it's been worked out great, and we don't see anything changing. But again, it's just we think it's better that it be on record what's going on, and that, and it helps, obviously, to let people know. If nothing else, it's not so much for the people that bring the cars, but those people that come to see the cars.
Right. If you're going to be around, this is something to put on your calendar and make a point to come downtown and see these cars. It's definitely worth it. It's fun.
And then we get them from 4 or 5 states that come to town for this. So, and most of them have been reoccurring, or they bring new friends or whatever along. So it's grown from a few hundred cars or less to that 350, 400 cars.
Yeah. Very nice. Well, thank you. And are there any questions? Anybody have any questions for Bill? No questions? All right, we'll take some action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 19 is discussion of a forestry position and equipment needs for the 2020 proposed budget. And I see Jay DeLange is here. He's the Director of Park and Rec Department, Park, Recreation, and Forestry Department.
Yes.
Got to get that forestry part in for this.
Exactly.
Jay, you want to
It's
tell
all
us about
forestry
this?
tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to discuss our forestry program with you a little bit. Last week at the budget hearing, the mayor had the slide on the unmet needs list. And we did not make any requests such as that for the 2020 budget, but as I was listening to that needs list, the forestry program just, it's all I could think about. So during the interim, I did speak with Bruce Bueller, our liaison to the Park and Recreation Board, and he kind of carried it forward to the mayor, and here we are this evening. So just wanted to share what I am thinking about would be adding an additional position. Currently, we have 2 staff members in the forestry department, and our Parks and Forestry superintendent, he's kind of split 50-50 between parks and forestry, which spreads his duties very thin. You know, there's actually a lot of activity that goes on with the his aspect of the forestry program too, when we consider the citizen calls that we get about their trees, and we have to call in the locates when we're going to do tree work, that type of thing. It's all very time consuming. And I think if we could have a lot of the other Class A communities in the state have some type of city forester, they're titled differently, but that's somebody that's pretty much dedicated to the forestry program. And I think with the impending emerald ash borer situation that we have, that position would be very valuable to the community. And also then, equipment needs. Still with a small staff, there is, and I really don't know what the title of the equipment would be. I'll call it a grapple saw truck. You probably saw there is one private such machine in town, and it's really an incredible piece of equipment. It's, it would greatly improve the efficiency of the forestry program in the community, as well as the safety, not only for staff, but also for citizens and property in the community. So I think, I don't see these as wants. I see them as needs as we move forward with the forestry program in the community, and that's why I just appreciate this opportunity to talk about it with you folks tonight.
All right, so this was not listed as an unmet need, nor was the equipment listed as an unmet need, and you're requesting that we update the list of those unmet needs, and for the budget purpose, these are that wouldn't have been included in the ordinance. Kristen?
Currently at the stage we're at a little bit with this position, this would be a new position for the city. So part of the thing that's difficult even placing it in the unmet need is we don't really know what those dollar amounts are. So the normal process anytime we add a position to the city is to go in, make the job description, and then we would grade that position. So without knowing that at this point, I think kind of the direction we're looking at is Jay provided a couple examples of some other forester, is that what they're called?
City forester.
Yep.
Different titles.
Yep, positions in other communities. So Jelaine, the HR director, is working to create the city's job description. So I think the next step will be that once we get the job description created, we will probably have McGrath work to grade that position. Then once that position would be graded, then we would have a better understanding of what impact it would have on the budget. So I don't think this is the last time that we'll see it, but I think Jay just kind of wanted to let the council know where he sees the need, and then once I get some closer numbers, I can bring those back.
And the magazine that's being passed around, did that come from you, Jay?
Yes, it did.
What was the dollar amount on the equipment?
You know, I've been trying to contact Sioux Falls Park and Rec Department because they do own one there, but the gentleman I wanted to speak to, he wasn't in the office either Friday or today, so I will try and get that. Just throwing a price out there, I would say probably starting at $270,000 on up.
Okay. It's a bucket truck.
Well, it would, eliminate that bucket truck. And I tell you what, talking with staff in Sioux Falls, like with this unit they have now, as far as efficiency, they estimate it about 3 to 1 that they can take 3
So
trees down.
Yeah,
with
it's
this
remote. It's,
yeah.
There's not actually a person in
No, this
doing
would
the
be
cutting.
this would be a remote control.
Yeah, I see.
And they told me too that it takes time you get to learn how to run it, but once they get talented with it, they do a very good job.
Yeah.
And like our forestry staff has told me, some of the large cottonwoods that, like the private tree service has taken down in town, they can do that in about an hour to an hour and a half, and it would take our staff probably a day to take that same tree down. And we do have throughout the community, boulevards, parks, golf course, we do have a lot of cottonwoods as well. Not only considering the ash, but there's a lot of cottonwoods that need to be addressed in the community.
Right. I was kind of surprised that there wasn't something like this in the budget request, and I think it's, based upon what we're facing with the emerald ash borer future crisis, it's something we need to talk about.
Well, and I appreciate that, and it's not fun to say, but the economic impact is going to be enormous one way or the other. But if we can get out in front of it before we have the infestation, once we're quarantined, then the prices are only going to go up. So
Right.
everything we can do beforehand, the better off we're going to be.
Right. Any questions for Jay?
Just a Glenn, we're in the process of removing a bunch of trees at Summerwood right now, and the piece of equipment you're referring to, Jay, it's amazing how quickly they can take big trees. So I think this is something that is worth discussing.
Yep. Councilman Albertson?
I think Jay's on to something because the cottonwoods that he's talking about, and then I think on Cattail Crossings, I'm probably wrong, but I think it was upwards of 35 cottonwoods that need to be taken down. And, if it takes the guys a day, but this could do it in an hour and a half, doesn't take very long for you talking about real savings. And Jay said earlier that we probably had 4,000 ash trees and that the city would be responsible in removing. So maybe,
Yes, I don't know an exact number, but just off the top, and we are going to start the tree inventory. We're going to do a test run on that tomorrow. Master gardeners are really stepping up, and I think they're showing an interest, so that's great. And, I would probably look at that 35%. One thing I can tell you is that Huron, they began their tree inventory this summer, and they talked to their director last week, and he said they're about 25% completed, and they're at 42% ash trees in Huron.
Ooh.
So.
Wow.
Oh, it's going to devastate the state.
Hey, Jay, this is Adam Lallam. Have you talked to Terex as far as that? They make the trucks and stuff like that. Is that it's a grapple hook on the end of a bucket? Is that what or where the bucket would take? typically would be? Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's true. And you know, the grapple and saw are basically an attachment because you know you can probably multi-use this machine with a crane type attachment and that type of thing too. So, but
I mean, it is on a chassis though, correct? I mean,
right,
you're
right.
talking a scissor style hydraulic system and then grapple with saw, correct?
Yeah, with the knuckle boom that you can really have flexibility and movability with that.
Yeah, I mean, they sell a ton to, I think it's Aspen Tree Service and stuff like that, which is a multinational company. So I'd check with them as far as getting at least some preliminary numbers on a vehicle of that type.
That would be good.
Yep. Councilman Albertson?
Jay, if you want to practice on 6 ash trees just to kind of get this working, see how it works, you know, for practice, I've got a property that I could put you on.
Well, you know, if we had the equipment, I got a crew that would take you up on that tomorrow.
I think we got plenty of places to practice.
Well, and Jay, personally, off of what Councilman Albertson said, there's a few trees out at the golf course that personally I don't like that you can remove. That yeah.
I understand.
Jay, this is Councilman. I have just a quick question for you, just kind of a learning point. But as we're looking at taking these ashes out, what's our plan for maybe, I'm just making sure, do we have a plan and stuff for coming back in and diversifying our tree population to replace those trees so that when it does devastate the state, we have something in place already to start reforesting?
Yes, we absolutely need to diversify the urban forest. You know, not only do we have all the ash, but if we say we got 35% ash, we probably have 25 to 30% maples, and that's probably next on the list. So we really got to be conscious of that. And we are quite far north that hardiness is a factor, that it's kind of hard to grow a lot of different species, but we got to find those and try some different things, get them out there and see how they do for us.
What are other cities choosing for species?
You know, there's trying to stay away from the maple, some of the honey locust, some of the elms, you know, they've had pretty good luck with them. You know, just there's species that we haven't really tried that I think we should, like an Ammermackie or shagbark hickory, but I know the nurseries are having some problems with establishing the roots on those. So, you know, really need to work with the nurseries and the communities and see what we can do. And because Dr. Ball would recommend no more than 10% of any one species.
Yeah.
So I was actually poking around a little bit on the Arbor Day Foundation website too, and they have, and I'm sure you guys are tracking, you're experts in this, but it's quite a large swath of recommendations that they have for our zone. So, I mean, there's a lot of really good-looking options out there. I know, I'm sure there's things that factor into it that I'm not thinking about, but certainly a lot of great choices out there.
Exactly, and you know, the hardiness factor is the most important factor. You want something that's going to survive for that 30, 40 years so it can become a mature tree.
Right. Other questions or comments? Yes, Councilman Albertson.
I change gears, Jay's here, could I just change gears? Because I had a situation that they said there was a near accident out on the northwest part of the lake where the bike trail is being proposed. What's the timeline on that, finishing it, the one out, you know, on the hills that we talk about, Memorial Park or Parkview? What's the timeline on that?
On Old 139?
Yeah.
Okay, for the first half of that to Linwood Drive, we applied for the Transportation Alternative Grant that we were successful with last year for $400,000. Now, we applied for the second half of that this year, and we put in a letter of intent. The Department of Transportation has been out and done their inspection, and now I think that application is due October 1st, if I'm not mistaken. And then we'll see, like last year, it was in November where we went out to Pier and gave a presentation on that. And if we were successful, hopefully we could do both of the grants in one project, both phases in one project, and that would probably be 2022 when that would happen. You know, hopefully we'd be in pretty good shape. I know when the DOT staff was out here, they said there was $3.4 million in requests, and they have $1.2 million available. Last year they had money left over, but this year they don't. So, but I think they like our plan and approach of completing the trail around Lake Compesca. So hopefully this can go through and we can get that grant, and that would tie the trail from Parkview Drive to the northwest corner of Sandy Shore Recreation Area.
Yeah, that's hard for people to wait. They want it done, and we're getting there as fast as we can.
Yeah, it does take time.
Yeah. Other questions or comments? All right, well, thank you very much, Jay.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. The next item on the agenda is old business. Does anyone have any? Councilman Roby.
Heath?
Yes,
Any
Councilman
updates
Roby.
on Cherry Creek Drive, please?
Absolutely. As of last Thursday, the 15th of August, again, meeting with the developer to the north, their agent, and what their plans are on grading. They have incorporated in their grading plans, I don't remember if we got this much in detail the last time we talked about this, but they've incorporated in their grading plans a realignment of our drainage channel. In this recent meeting and discussing with Colin DeYoung with Austin Engineering, he and I were both on the same page that we should move forward with a delineation, a wetland delineation of our channel. What that does is, even if we're just regrading it, we still need to get checkoff from the Corps because of the known presence of a former identified wetland on the jurisdiction maps. So what I asked Colin to do is to provide his contact who does wetland delineations to me, and we would work together to get a quote for their services to do that delineation. We have funds in our budget this year, as you know, to make the corrections through this area. I would propose using those funds for the professional services to get that delineated. Once it is delineated, we can move forward with getting the course check off. They can then determine and help guide us through the process of what they would allow us to do as far as the simple regrading, what are we going to incorporate any tile into that or not, what would trigger mitigation, and all those kind of details that are pending yet. So long story short, delineation is the next step, and we'll move forward accordingly in the most productive manner from there.
Right, is there any other old business?
Mayor, I'm not sure if this would be old business or what, but little leeway. I would just like to acknowledge and recognize David J. Law, who's sitting out in the audience. I think this is his last official city council meeting. I'm sure you'll come back just as a spectator all the time, but I think that you've done a great service to the city of Watertown, and I think all of us on city council, we like having people know what we're doing, and we want to thank you. Best wishes for retirement.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Reed. Other old business, Councilman Albertson?
You're smiling because you know I'm going to ask about any update on the skate rink, the hockey rinks.
I don't have anything to announce, but I can say that we're working on it, and a group of council members has reconvened with the staff to move forward. Any other old business? New business. I do have one item of new business. We have an urban renewal district in our town, and every year the council has the option of considering moving forward with an assessment project to make improvements to the urban renewal district, which will benefit the downtown area. And so the council will be considering doing that on the 3rd of September 2019. Everybody who would be assessed was given a letter notifying them of the hearing, and along with an estimate of what the assessment would be. And the project this year is the Lofts development, which is what we have the TIF for, and we've been doing development agreements, talking about this a lot lately. We think this multi-use development is going to be game-changing for downtown. It includes retail, residential, and a parking lot use. So all of these things will benefit everyone downtown to a certain degree, and it's a very exciting project. So that's the plan right now. That's the only thing in the plan, but it's a significant item, and that's what the money would be used for. And if anyone has any questions, they can come and see the assessment roll at the finance office and see how that works. But there will be a public hearing on the 3rd of September. Is there any other new business? Yes.
Sorry, I guess we overlapped a little bit there. The only thing I kind of had for new business, something I've been looking at for a little bit and talking to a couple constituents about, but I know that we are going to do striping and stuff with the road. However, when we took all the lights out, we didn't really put something adequate back in to indicate that those are in fact pedestrian crossings and vehicles need to slow down in the downtown area. Right now, I'm kind of looking at potentially coming up with a solution that, and it's just temporary, small, not very expensive, but maybe we look at considering some in-street pedestrian crossing signs put in the middle of the intersection, like or parts. It'd probably be easier with the visual here, but I put together an email that I'll send out to everyone kind of showing what it is, but it's a matter of public safety that I think we kind of need to keep in mind, especially right now when we don't have crosswalks in place and it's a part of town where we have every demographic going around, including the elderly and small children. So just making sure that we make vehicles accountable and they go slow, since it's also where all our bars are, and hopefully try and increase that safety, because we kind of know if a road looks like you can go fast through it, you tend to go fast, and the roads in town are very wide. So maybe this would help deter that.
Okay, thank you. So if you couldn't hear what Michael Hoyer was saying, he's looking at a plan to do some signage or markings, or they make little posts that are don't harm cars if you hit them, and they just bend down and flat back up just to warn people to go slow downtown, and some sort of plan for that so that people realize they should be driving slowly downtown. Is that accurate, Michael?
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay, thank you. Other new business?
Yes, this is Glenn. I had a couple things I was going to make a quick comment about. One, had the constituent reach out, and I think there was a good PSA that was released, just reminding people that golf carts are not allowed on the bike path unless you're on the bike path immediately adjacent to the cattail golf course. Just a reminder that, that we got to abide by that because it is a safety hazard. So please keep your golf carts off the bike path. Secondly, and Dan, you may want to weigh in on this, or Mayor, with the water situation out at Lake Compesca right now, we're getting concerns, comments, criticisms, complaints, et cetera, whatever you want to call it, about the high water. And just, want to remind people, you're taking a risk when you have your property out there on the lake, but you want a secure property to make sure it doesn't start floating around and end up on somebody else's waterfront. Be considerate of others when you got your boat or jet ski out there as far as creating a wake. And just really not much that we can do about the water situation out there, but just use some common sense as far as securing property, being considerate, and realize that you are taking risks when you have property out there in the water. So I just want to pass out word on. A group of us did meet around the table last Friday to kind of discuss the situation. The bottom line is there's just some common sense and courtesy, but not much that we can do. And I think our bigger concern, obviously, is what we could be facing next spring with whatever the water situation is between now and then.
All right, thank you, Glenn. And I would like to piggyback on that. What he said about golf carts on the bike trail is not a new rule. It's a rule that we've had on our books for a long time, and people have gotten lax, and they're starting to use golf carts where they shouldn't be. Golf carts are not allowed on the bike path. They have never been allowed on the bike path unless there is a spot which has special consideration and is signed for that. And the only place we have that is immediately adjacent to the municipal Cattail Crossings golf course. It's not okay to ride your four-wheeler on the bike path by the other golf course or between the golf courses or around that neighborhood because there are golf courses. It's illegal now. It always has been. So please keep that in mind. It's a safety issue. And then the lake issue as well. Thank you for bringing those up, Glenn.
Your comment about the
Yes.
golf. I've actually ran into people who've challenged that motorized golf cart issue because they had a battery-operated golf cart. So battery-operated is also a motorized golf cart. It was flabbergasting, actually, but so if you don't pedal it or push it or pull it, it's motorized.
Right. Doesn't matter what the power source is. Okay. Anything else? Any other old business or new business? All right. Are there any liaison member reports? Don't see anyone volunteering. So the next item on the agenda is executive session pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2. And we will have an executive session this evening in order to discuss and consult with legal counsel on contractual matters. And we do not expect to take action upon coming out. So we need a motion to go into executive session. A motion by Y and a second by Manti. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries.